The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "There's only a perspective seeing, only a perspective knowing, and the more affects we allow to speak about one thing, the more eyes, different eyes, we can use to observe one thing, the more complete will our concept of this thing, our objectivity, be." Perspectivism recognizes the limited viewpoint through which we see the world. And while this may be true among individuals, it also pertains to the individual mind, which takes an innumerable set of angles and shades and melds them into the images we see before us. William James not only spoke of the blooming, buzzing confusion, but also identified the problem concerning how these disparate sensations coalesce into unified objects of experience. That problem can be stated like this. Since, as discussed in the previous video, distinct brain areas specialize in processing specific kinds of sensory information, one specializing in color, another in shape, and yet another in motion, how then is it possible that the mind takes these individually processed bits of information and brings them together to form a conscious experience of a unified object? We've so far considered how categories of sensory input are simultaneously processed in different parts of the brain. This raises a major problem, though, and it's one so fundamental that it concerns nothing less than the nature of consciousness itself. So we can talk about it in these terms. My experience of the world does not seem like a series of discrete sensory inputs. When I see a car, I don't see its shape, color, and motion as separate elements of my experience, but rather as a single object. But given that the brain processes these categories in different parts of the brain, what's the mechanism that ultimately brings the pieces together to form this unified experience I'm having right now? Also, in a related issue, when I'm having an experience of two objects, let's say a blue triangle and a red circle, what allows me to perceive these shapes as having these colors and not instead perceiving the triangle as red and the circle as blue? This is known as the binding problem. Our everyday experiences consist of predictably unified objects. We ordinarily don't experience color absent of structure and motion without an object. There are some exceptions, however, and these exceptions might shed some light on the problem. One exception are known as conjunction errors. When perceiving two separate objects, we ordinarily don't mix up their colors, but under specific experimental conditions, this has been demonstrated to happen. Such a study would have the participants focus on an object at the center of the screen while engaging in some task, perhaps focusing on how many times that object flashes or to identify when its color changes. At the same time, participants were shown simple colored objects on the screen that were outside the main area of focus, but they were still within the peripheral vision of the participants. They were consciously aware that these objects were present and they could accurately identify their features. However, the interesting thing was that the participants were far more likely to confuse what color belonged to which object. This research finding, among others, supports an explanation for the binding problem called feature integration theory. According to this theory, sensory inputs are processed in a series of stages. First, the constituent components of the object are analyzed, what is known as the pre-attentive stage. Next, the individual components just processed are combined through focused attention. This finally leads to the conscious perception of a unified object. In the situation where a conjunction error has occurred, the lack of focused attention on objects in the periphery leads to their individual components being processed, but without any consistent integration. So one answer to the binding problem is focused attention. But how does attention do this neurologically? Neural synchronization theory provides another solution to the binding problem, one that may complement feature integration theory. According to this explanation, sensory inputs, while processed in distinct brain regions, lead to neurons in those regions to fire together at a similar rate. This rhythmic synchrony is then registered by the brain as a unified experience. Focus attention in a specified location of the visual field may be what allows these distinct areas to fire at similar rates. As is the case with most explanations provided in this video series, the binding problem is far more complex and nuanced than presented here. And the solutions presented are not the only ones, and they're not without dissent from cognitive scientists. In particular, Daniel Dennett, who makes the radical claim that conscious experience is in fact not unified, but rather a grand illusion of the mind. It's constructed out of its tendencies to cover over the gaps of experience. When this series ends, I plan to make videos that move back into these topics in greater detail. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe so you can know when the next video is uploaded. I'll see you next time.